Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy to see many friends and colleagues in this day-long conference by America Society and Asia Society. We are the curators of the appearance, and we want to thank all the team here at AS, especially Carla for organizing this event, and Kalima at Asia Society for organizing on their side. So we'll begin by saying a few words about the institution and the exhibition. This is the first show dedicated to art of the Asian diaspora at America Society, which is one of the first institutions in the US to focus on the arts of the Americas. As a debut, the show becomes an appearance in and of itself, a contribution to the institution that sheds light on often overlooked experiences and artistic trajectories across Latin America and the Caribbean. Such previous absence, one might say, is symptomatic of how the field of Latin American art and Caribbean art history at large has relegated Asian diasporic perspectives to its margins. This might also complicate the notion of Asian American art, in part due to how Latin America has challenged notions of America itself, in terms of broad geographic and cultural constructions of America, Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia. But the idea today is really to focus on the show. So we borrowed the title of this exhibition, The Appearance, from a 1975 print by Japanese-Brazilian artist Lijio Kumura. This print presents a grid composed of a sequence of 9 images in which a set of lines gradually appears to form the shape of a cube in a suggested 3-dimensional space. In this work, the act of appearing implies a paradox. To appear is to engage in a process of coming into space and yet remaining almost invisible. We embrace the term appearance for its open-ended meaning and generative potential. Appearance is a word that is related to visibility and the act of becoming visible, to different types of apparition and ghostly figures, and to idea of impression and physical semblance. And we chose this elusive framework to evoke something akin to the so-called Asian diasporic experience. The complexity of negotiating visibility and invisibility, legibility and illegibility, and materiality and immateriality in societies that have largely excluded people of Asian descent from their cultural debates, often casting them as outsiders. In this show, these negotiations of appearances connect to at least 3 larger topics: history, spirituality, and representation. And these topics are interweaved throughout the show, summoned through formal and thematic conversations between artists of different generations and countries of origins, and working within distinct media. By so doing, we sought to contribute to a reflection on the relationship between artistic production and the histories of racialization that intersect and diverge across Latin America and the Caribbean, opening space for a dialogue that transgresses time and national borders. So, Yudi and I are going to be reading this presentation together because in the spirit of collaboration, as we did everything in this show, we are also going to be presenting together.
Okay, so this is an installation view. This is a photo of the when we were installing. So just to say that this is the only photo that we are using before the show was put together. Okay. The first room of the exhibition introduces the major ideas of the show. As we enter the space, the front view of the room includes artworks distributed not only on its walls, but also standing on the floor and hanging from the ceiling. They include an embroidered fabric, photocopied documents, a spiral-shaped hanging sculpture, a monitor screen on the floor, a photograph, and a stick bearing a set of objects knotted together by strings. This initial view, that is not complete in this photo, I have to say, there are like parts missing in it, gives us a glimpse of the different mediums presented in the exhibition, as well as its major themes and geographical scope. So displayed in this room are works of artists from the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. including countries like Jamaica, Brazil, Costa Rica, and Guatemala. In thematic conversation with Lydia Okumura's work, The Appearance, that we saw in the previous slide, Esvin Alarcon Lam's The Apparition, presented on a screen positioned on the floor, takes up the space with its ambient sound of water. The sound follows visitors into the following room, where it gradually dissipates to give way to the sonic presence of another piece. Coming from the opposite room, the third room, where the sound of ocean waves are echo from Chantal Penalosa Fong's Fong, the video that we discussed earlier today with the artist. So water is a theme throughout the show, both with the presence of sound and in artworks that directly represent the sea through photographs and words, such as the case of Lina Kim's painting over a photograph of the ocean on the left side of the screen, and Sandra Nakamura's transparent, almost invisible in this screen, words that are attached to this the archway when you're looking back from the third room to the exhibition. So if people haven't, like, if any of you haven't seen this, next time, I'm sure it's going to be perceptible. So the work, which is Sandra Nakamura's, reads whatever the ocean waves touch, which is a reference to an ancient Chinese poem that is completed by the idea that there will be Chinese. But as we enter the second room, however, our gaze is guided to an interconnected set of white pedestals positioned at its center. Those are rectangular volumes diagonally and transversely positioned within the gallery space. For the gaze to lay on the sculptures on display, a visitor will have to walk around and in search for the angles to see through the obstructed views that those volumes create. So this is an example that was like observed in a review of the show. We were happy to see that. As some of you might remember, we have to really cut angles and move around to discover pieces. They're never fully present to the eyes. But the second room highlights a set of post-war paintings as well. On the south wall and in the left side wall that references abstraction and also spiritual practices. So the history of abstraction in Latin America in that period plays an important role in understanding how certain artists navigated legibility and illegibility and question the formation of meaning within their diasporic contexts. While narratives of abstract art in Latin America emphasize avant-garde geometric movements like concrete art that are frequently tied to national ideals of development and progress. So these artists that were also mentioned by Mariola Alvarez, they were working with a specific, some of them working with a specific kind of abstraction. So we here have an example of Tomi Otaki from Brazil in in a similar time frame than Kazuya Sakai. Those are like, let's say, examples of the gestural calligraphic abstraction from the post-war period. So their work, often described as gestural, lyrical, or informal, were deeply influenced by Eastern calligraphy and Zen practices that were introduced to Latin America, alongside and through Asian migration. Okay.
Yeah. So a whole generation of Asian diasporic artists throughout Latin America embraced this kind of informal abstraction, especially in the post-war period, bringing East Asian cultural references to mainstream institutions. And these include all the artists that Mariola discussed earlier today, like Manabu Mabi, Flavio Chiró, Tomio Taki, Chikashi Fukushima. As well, all of these artists were working in Brazil, but we also have artists like Kazuya Sakai in Argentina, Francisco Hang in Venezuela, and Carlos Nakatani in Peru. And in our selection and interpretation of these historic abstract artists in the show, we sought to emphasize abstraction relationship to Eastern calligraphy, calligraphy as a writing form, and its specific relationship to the body, due to the kind of repetitive bodily gesture that is required to learn and to practice calligraphy. Works like this, they gain a special meaning when considering the specific political context of the Second World War, when anti-Japanese campaigns limited the freedom of Japanese migrants and their descendants, enforcing deportations and relocations to different Latin American countries. For example, in Peru, the government of Peru deported approximately 2,000 people of Japanese ancestry to US concentration camps. Mexico forced relocation of Japanese, and then in Brazil, there were a lot of restrictions of traveling, assembling, speaking, and learning Japanese, and even possessing publications written in Japanese. And in this exhibition, we selected one of Tomio Taki's paintings from her series known as Pinturas Cegas, that translates to blind paintings, in which the artist painted blindfolded, limiting her senses to create an image of gestures that is based on the register of time and her own body memory of doing those gestures. And also in Kazuya Sakai, Obra Número 1, artwork number 1, the monochromatic scheme of the painting references the gestural quality of Eastern calligraphy and ink painting. But here, Sakai is disrupting any potential meaning derived from language signs through abstraction, emphasizing instead his bodily gestures.
I think we should. So appearance also relates to forms of apparition and ghostly figures. That's something that was part of Bob Lee's question before we moved here, which can take meaning in also in Eastern spiritual practices that recognize different forms of beings, including ancestral and mythical figures. So in this exhibition, we associated the elusiveness of apparitions and spirituality with artists engaging with history and its erasures, as well as with artists experimenting with material or immaterial artistic processes. So those drawings, for example, that are part of a series titled Smoke series, reflect the artist's childhood memories at a coffee plantation in Japanese populated rural São Paulo, when he observed and studied cloud formations and witnessed the surrounding forests being consumed by fire. Created with artisanal oil lamps that he made, these drawings capture the fleeting immaterial quality of smoke while evoking the symbolism of transformation in religious rituals, such as the burning of incense. We have also here a reference to ink drawing that the artist transforms by using fire or how do you say fumaça? Yeah, fuligem. Soot. Sorry. Yeah, using soot or air instead of water as a conduit for the charcoal. So similarly, Cuban-born artist Chin Ho Cheng, who thought of painting as a spiritual practice, created his untitled work through experiments with alchemical changes caused by the oxidation of iron oxide and gesso on paper. Both Ishikawa and Cheng viewed these material transformations as reflections of nature and the cycles of life. In a way, in contrast, Dun Lee's memory stick explores the material and embodied nature of memory through a collection of objects gathered from their early life, displayed in transparent wraps and attached to a wood stick. The title, Memory Stick, suggests a play on analogies between the immaterial and the material, the digital, the image, right, and the analogic, the object, the synthetic and the organic. So I think it's hard to see from the distance. Okay, so Tia.
So appearance in this show also refers to disappearance and the erasures of individuals and histories as a result of strategic survival from racist policies and forms of visibility and visuality that refuse to acknowledge Asian subjects as integral to national communities in the region. Engaging with different forms of disappearance and historical omissions, artists in the show revisit both public and private archives to challenge national ideologies, such as the ideology of mestizaje, of racial mixing, which excluded Asians from official histories. In the 19th century, Latin American elites began crafting ideas of national identity based on varied forms of mestizo nationalisms, of mixed-race nationalisms. While these narratives served to account for and to assimilate the majority of their non-white populations, mostly indigenous and black populations, they often coexisted with anti-Asian discourses that fostered Asian exclusion laws designed to protect their ideals of modern, cohesive nations, protect these nations from the undesirable elements of Asians. Echoing the violent rhetoric and anti-Asian migration laws perpetuated in the US in the 19th century, in South America, racist rhetoric also led to restriction and exclusions of Asian immigration. In this period, before the spread of anti-Japanese state practices, especially during the Second War, anti-Chinese laws emerged in different countries, limiting immigration of Chinese and spurring numerous episodes of anti-Asian violence in countries like Peru and Mexico. Costa Rican artist Mimian Su investigates an episode of this history through an affective lens in her work number 1674, Sección Administrativa. This piece features an embroidered reproduction of a letter written in 1907 by two Chinese men living in Costa Rica. Their names are Jacobo and Nicolas Sanchez. It's a letter that they wrote to the Costa Rican government in which they ask permission for the government to open an exception to the Chinese immigration ban to allow their wives and children to join them in their new home. And here she embroidered the letter that she found in the National Archive in Costa Rica in yellow, in Spanish, in this textile piece, and we translated the text to English and added as part of the exhibition object label. And this textile specifically is this very ornate red silk that is that has a lot of couples of birds flying, etc., that is traditionally used to cover the bed of newlywed Chinese couples. In the context of Asian diasporic experiences, the idea of appearance is also related to concepts of visibility and representation. Asians and their descendants in the Americas have long grappled with issues of representation because of the history of stereotype rooted in Orientalist and racist constructions. In this project, we avoided engaging with the binary between invisibility and visibility, which in the art world often is tied to issues of representation, and then its relatively shallow institutional solution of inclusion. We sought instead to propose visibility and representation as a process of negotiation, which includes different levels of agency from the parts of the artists. In this show, we selected artists engaging with representation, but they employ different formal strategies such as camouflage and image blurring. For example, the portrait by Chinese Jamaican artist Albert Chong and the Indian Guadeloupean artist Kelly Sinama Mary. While Albert Chong uses long exposure photography to create this ghostly self-portrait that escapes representation, Kelly Sinapa Mary paints her grandmother based on a family photograph, but her skin is fully camouflaged with domestic plants that are believed to have spiritual powers.
When we think about visibility in this context, we're also considering the triangulation of cases. That is, who is doing the act of looking and who is being looked at. In the third room, we included artworks in which the portrayed subjects are giving their backs to the audience, thus denying viewers access to their faces, like the case of Chen Kongfang and Suchitra Matai. Creating a triangulation with these two pieces, and arguably with the entire exhibition, we have the site-specific work by Sandra Nakamura titled Exhausting the Scope of the Visible. An intervention on the architecture of the space, as she folds the walls of the gallery like she would fold a piece of paper, and adds a mirror to the floor, inviting viewers to look at other areas of the gallery space from a different perspective. This piece makes itself noticeable even from the distance, playing with our perception of the exhibition space itself, while creating a conversation with Lydia Komura's The Appearance in the first room. On the opposite side of the installation, in the same room, we have a work by Alice Yura, titled Photo Yura 1, in which she positions herself in the middle of many cases. In this work, Yura is posing for her father, who is taking her portrait, and her grandfather is depicted in a photograph hanging on the back wall, with his gaze turned to the camera. In the exhibition context, those are the viewers, the visitors. So dressed in a long, sumptuous red dress, the artist takes control of the terms of her own visibility, claiming an artistic lineage that connects her practice to the vernacular photography of commercial studios and family rituals. Alice Yura queers her family's photographic genealogy, previously led by masculine figures, and presents herself as a trans woman and artist, pushing tradition transformed into the future. So we have here some images of the context in which this piece was made. It was part of a series of photographs that were commissioned for Parable of Progress, a show that was part of the centenary of the Modern Art Week in São Paulo, in Brazil. And she was, her work was commissioned to be in conversation with Anita Malfati's representations of Japanese artists. Anita Malfatti being like known as the founder of Brazilian modernism. And Anita Malfatti lived in New York. She came to study in New York, and she portrayed what is, to this day, people would, there's just like this idea of that this portrayed person here is Yasuo Kuniyoshi, an American artist, who she met at an art school in New York. And in the second, or in the middle, there's both are translated as the Japanese, right? Is an artist that she met in Paris while studying there in the 20s. So this kind of representation that was very common during the apex of modernist art in Brazil at the spirit with this generation of artists are kind of like crystallized in these images, where those artists were portrayed in a way that they lose their names or their identity as artists, and sometimes are also portrayed dressing in specific ways that appeal to certain kinds of publics and costumes that were happening in Brazil at the time, like this kind of dress and that a japonesa is wearing that would be a costume for carnival celebrations, right? So Aliciura in this in her other photo of the series is holding a book on Anita Malfati's work to create this connection beyond the visual elements of the clothing, the pose, and etc. Which takes us back to our closing statement of the text, in which more than her own family tradition, right? This transformation that she's pushing forward is. Oh, Alice is here. I thought you left. It's weird to talk in third person, like Alice and you are there. Oh my God. Okay. So let me finish this last paragraph. By using the lens of diaspora to consider the emergence of new subjectivities in the context of transoceanic histories of migration, displacement, and resettlement, the appearance emulates the acts of agency akin to those performed by Aliciura, or at least we aim to emulate. Addressing the somewhat fictional aspect inherent in gathering artists from a broad range of contexts and distinct inheritances under the same terminological umbrella, which might parallel the diasporic imagination of a homeland. It is actually focusing on a specific aspect of diaspora, which is the shared survival strategies to negotiate space in hegemonic centers. So in this process, such articulations we conclude might reshape narratives and create new modes of appearing. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, we have some time for questions. Like we have time for one question, maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I think I would really like to reiterate the question that I posed earlier in the context here, to look at it perhaps in a different way. And I don't know if you have thought about this aspect of it, the spirituality aspect of it, more than in terms of appearance or disappearance or ghosts, but also in terms of more than the art, it's the people, and the even the aspect of the expelling or the opposition to Asians and being sent to camps and things like that. Is the aspect of mourning or grief of humanity as seen from a different materialistic point of view as dying, as death, and coming to grips with the Asian presence in terms of their importance for them of how to mourn, how to grieve. That this is raised in both, I think, in more explicitly, I think, in your show, but it is an undercurrent in the Legacy show. And that it's being brought out today in the show on the West Coast called Spirit House, and in the work of Anine Cheng, whose book in 2021 talked specifically about this different kind of psychology, which is utterly different from the psychology of materialism.
Yeah, I mean, I feel there's so much in there in your observations, the things in common that are part of the topics of interest, of research that artists are working on, which, let's say, helps us curators as the same way as we in this conversation are also bringing questions to artists to organize this kind of shows. Like, I haven't seen the one in the West Coast yet. I've been to the installation process of Howie and the team at NYU. But yeah, there are so many aspects we did like when we think historically, there is a lot of let's say research done on some of the artists of the show or some of the contexts that do focus on religion, let's say, or spiritual practices, like in the context of the Caribbean, that may be a topic for Tao. In the case of both Albert Chong and Wilfredo Lam, right? But there's also in the cases of the examples that we brought from the Japanese diaspora in Latin America, like which is something that connects to the questions that we were discussing previously. There's a transformation in the perception of East Asian religions in this pre and post-war period that reflects also like let's say the American occupation of Japan and like the end of the military threat, so a kind of a domestication of and also the intimacies that are part of war in itself, and the circulation of people that it also creates, right? So people that are coming in spreading the word of Buddhism in like the avant-garde circles. This was happening, like Kazuya Sakai, the painter that was showed here, the calligraphic abstraction. He translated Suzuki's introduction to Zen to Spanish in 1960. So he was involved. He was also part of this. But at the same time, there are a lot of works dedicated to how religion was, for example. I won't say a lot of works, but there is bibliography on how Buddhism could be looked at as playing an important role in the imprisonment of Japanese Americans and Japanese Latin Americans, as we know, in internment camps, right, during the World War II.
I think also, for example, the historical artists that we have here, the ones that were creating abstractions, they were creating abstractions at a time in which one of the major trends in abstraction was the very universalist, quote unquote, universalist, kind of concrete, very rational trends of abstraction. And these artists instead, they were bringing the heritage of calligraphy and its relationship to Zen Buddhism. So they are bringing that, they're bringing their own kind of spiritual heritage into those practices. And then these are the historic artists in the post-war era. But I agree that there is an undercurrent, even with contemporary artists, that are very interested in spiritual practices, even though they might not be practicing Buddhist. They might have observed, they might have been raised with an altar, like a Buddhist altar at home, and they understand the rituals. One example is Mi Myung Soo. She has several pieces in which she is tapping into issues of spirituality in her work, even though she's...
Through mourning as well, right? You mentioned mourning.
Through mourning, yeah. Chin Ho Chang, he saw his practice, his artistic practice, as a spiritual practice, as integral to his spiritual practice, even though he wasn't like an openly practicing, not to my knowledge, Buddhist. Wilfredo Lam is another artist. So I think you are right. Like there is this undercurrent from these historic artists until the more recent generations.
Yeah, and like thinking in contemporary Brazilian art, I mean, Bruno is here. Sorry, Bruno, a researcher that is writing his book with a fellowship at the Met. But he is someone that, for example, does a lot of research into contemporary arts in relation to Afro-Brazilian spiritual traditions, which is something very, very strong, right, in the contemporary art scene, and that in our show, like, also appears through the Santeria, through in the case of Albert Chong, who was very into Rastafarianism when he was working in this series of photographs, and he still is. I won't say more in that regard, relation to the conversation that we had here. But I can remember, for example, how this is connected in Tao's work on reggae, right, and the also role of Jamaican of Chinese ancestry in the culture of reggae music. Sorry, I think this starts going like...
Okay, so I guess we need to move on to the keynote talk. Thank you so much.